So I think this talk might be useful if you want to learn some engineering principles. I think this is a cool story, and I think this is a cool way that I've learned how to build apps really, really fast. I also think it's pretty cool because the team that now works on this software is here, and I'm really happy to present this to them because I haven't done that before. So woohoo, thanks for showing up, people. But yeah, so the story starts a little bit like this. Sitting at work one day, a coworker comes up and says, hey, RJ, we want to build a scooter sharing service. And do you want to make the Android part of it? And I was just like, I work for Lyft. Why would we want a scooter sharing service? And they basically to a point, saying like our company mission is all about best transportation, and we want to make cities around people in our cars. Typical corporate stuff, but the point is, these scooters were doing some really interesting stuff at the time. This is early 2018. In LA, we had seen Bird launch in Venice Beach, and they were doing some really cool stuff, changing the way people were getting around. So I got pretty excited, and I wanted him to tell me more. So he came up with this proposal. He said, we have this golden opportunity emerging. We want to build a scooter sharing service for Lyft, but we don't have anything. We don't have any client stuff on iOS or Android. We don't have any server stuff. We don't have any firmware. Oh yeah, we don't have any scooters yet, and we don't have an operations team to do any of it. We also have 2 or 3 months, depending on who you ask, to actually make this happen. And did I want to join? The other side part to note is that this entire project was not a separate company, but it had to be done as part of Lyft, and we couldn't break Lyft in the process, nor had any part of the company's infrastructure had thought about what if we built a scooter sharing service. So I thought, like, would this be a project I, as an Android engineer, would want to jump in on? And kind of whenever I have these moments where I'm not really sure, first off, I want to introduce myself, because this is where I come into the story. I'm RJ. I've been doing Android for a long while, and I think they asked me to do this project because I was the only one crazy enough at the company to do it. But I was at Hulu, I was at Google building out a lot of their separate apps, and now I'm at Lyft. And I really love the whole premise of building apps for people, product engineering side of things, and that really is what drives me. So I knew that if I was going to take on this project, I really needed to make every moment of this 2-month deadline count. It was 3 months, but the reason it was 2 is because we have client release cycles, and I had 2 vacations planned, and I really wasn't going to not go on those vacations. And so I'm in these moments, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. I take a step back and a pause. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I need to be really sure of what success even means, and if I'm even possible for me to do this. But it was kind of hard to figure out what success meant in this case. But I could do a pretty good job of saying what not success would be, because I knew if we moved too slowly, we'd build something and miss the deadline, and that would be a failure, something I didn't want to do. But consequently, if we moved too fast, we risked building something non-functional, we released it on the wild, and it didn't work. The third danger would be if we built something that disrupted our core business too much. It didn't matter how good of a job we did, we wouldn't want to release it. And then finally, the one that I worry about the most is that even if we did all those things, if we built it, and we launched it, and our users didn't want it, we might as well have built nothing at all. So then I think of it as kind of success is about balance. It's about balancing the speed of your development and the reliability of your code. But it's not just that. And I think oftentimes we as engineers just think this is the only 2 things that matter. But I think usefulness of what comes out of it is the second dimension that matters enormously. And that's what I really want to talk about. What is useful? I think of useful as what solves a people problem. And I think Android engineers, a lot of people in this room, whether you work at startups or big companies, you have a huge hand in what the final product looks like. And the final product almost always is trying to solve a human problem for a human using your app. It's not a technical thing. It doesn't make a database more efficient. You're trying to do something for another human. which means that the output of what we do is really subjective. It's really ambiguous, and it's really not grounded in the level of technical certainty we usually want. So I thought if I'm going to do this project, I want to have some principles to guide me through it. I want to have some things that I know I can use as tools to make sure this goes well. And I didn't really think I knew these exactly at the time, and kind of looking back, I've been formulating them. But these are general principles I've been holding pretty well throughout my career building apps. The first one being stay simple and stay lean. The second one being reimagine over reinventing. And the third one being listen, learn, and launch what matters. So I'm going to tell the story about how we did end up launching Lyft scooters. And in the process, I want to go through these three separate principles. The first one being stay simple and stay lean, which I think of as just effectively building as absolutely little as possible, because I'm a lazy engineer. We had these opinions really strongly when we were first starting the project of just like, we need to move really fast, and you can't disrupt anything, which is totally understandable. Both had to be true. But in order to do that, we needed to figure out what space we could build in as quickly as possible. So anytime we start a new feature as part of a larger mobile code base, I think it's really safe to say, put it behind a feature flag. This is great. Feature flags are a really awesome way of gating whether or not a user sees a feature. Just be able to say like, hey, is Lyft scooters enabled? Oh, go to do this thing where we navigate you to the scooters. And this is great. But as we write these features, the actual code that goes into them is probably buried in a lot of other places. And what I mean by that is there are things like background services. For us, we had a polling service. Things like your routing or navigation flows. Things like your database layer or your data transfer layer. For us specifically, we had other touch points throughout their app where this feature might be exposed. And so if we just had a single feature flag gating this, it really wouldn't prevent any accidental exposures through any of these other vectors. So instead, we decided as our foundation that we would go with feature modules. And by that, we took all of our code and hid it behind one implement or API module. And that module, we made a no-op module for that did nothing. And then all of our interaction with our feature had to go through that API module. And then we used flavor modules to either load in the implementation or the no-op. So while we were actively in development before we released, our production got the no-op version. And this meant we could do any crazy things we wanted in our own code base, knowing we weren't going to tank the production app in any given way. So for this, we ended up just having a null check when we navigated to our feature, and we knew if it was null, we had not loaded anything at all, do not take any action, and we could reason this was going to be safe, which is cool. So now we have this like super safe foundation to start building, but we haven't really decided exactly what we're going to build. And I think this is all about how do you balance usefulness with technical difficulty. And I can tell you all about what's going to be technically difficult, but it's really hard to talk about what's going to be useful. Usually we just rely on a PM to tell you something like that. But I think that if you want to play a hand in deciding what's useful, it's really important to first decide what you're aiming for at all. And I think of that as the product North Star. And every single time I've built any app across any of the companies I've worked for, this has been one of the defining ways to avoid disagreements around your team, to resolve conflicts, and to empower the engineers to actually get involved in the process. And what I think of a product North Star, I think of, generally speaking, what's the human problem we're trying to solve? And generally speaking, how do we think we're going to go about solving it? And most importantly, this doesn't really talk about the technical side of things. It just talks about what are our values? What are we after? Kind of like the very first slide when I talked about what's Lyft's mission, which helps me evaluate, is this project even worthwhile? So after that, the next important thing is to find a golden path. And the golden path, technically speaking, the way I think of it is like the central user experience to solve the core problem under optimal conditions. But a nice way to think about it is just use a magic wand, wave your hand over all the edge cases, the empty states, the new user experience, and say, does this basic set of flows solve the thing we're trying to solve? So for us, it was pretty simple. You had a list of scooters. You went ahead and picked one. You went ahead and reserved it, and you unlocked it. Very simple, very straightforward flow. Of course, there's a ton of issues that might arise in here, but we were waving over that. And then finally, once you had done your ride, you had finished your ride, you took a photo, You got to this ride end screen, and you rated it. Great. We clearly outlined what we were going to do. But we also clearly outlined a whole bunch of things we weren't going to do. And I think that's actually the most important part. Because when you're actually building a new feature and you already have an existing product, it's so tempting to be like, oh, we need to add this, we need to add that, we need to add all the things our existing product already has. For us, this was ideas like, oh, like we should share your ETA from your scooter ride so your friend can see how you're coming to meet them. Or like, oh, we want you to be able to set a destination, we'll give you a scooter route there. And we want you to apply coupons and promos. But now we actually have an evaluative function. We actually can scope out how useful it's going to be, and then we can balance it with a technical difficulty that we as engineers can assess. So for that, it was like, hey, how hard is it to build sharing an ETA versus how much does this actually solve the user need that we were initially aiming for? And it was fairly straightforward. It doesn't actually solve the user need at all. So it's not that we're not going to do it. It's just it's not going to be prioritized at the current time. So now we've actually limited our features. We've limited what we're going to build, but now we need to decide how we're going to build the architecture to make this happen. And I think of a really great client-server architecture as having two main principles. The first one is you want it to be really straightforward and easy to reason about, so that in any sequence of events, you're able to tell what state the client is going to be in. But then you need to balance that with how is this going to change over time? How is this going to evolve? Does this have the wiggle room to change as our product naturally upgrades, adds new features? I had an engineer once tell me, the bigger the feature, the more unlikely it'll take shape in unexpected ways, and this is a picture of a desire path. Desire paths are effectively, a developer lays down a sidewalk, a pavement, and then your users, or humans, decide they're going to take a different route. And this is a great example of how architectures can evolve too, because as we think our architecture is going to move in some way, and we build in all of this versatility for it to expand, we actually realize that our users or our product demands something completely different that we didn't intend for. So then we expand there, and now we just have two sidewalks. So if I was to look back, here are like two options we could have done. So like the first part is we have this reserve state, this lock state, this unlock state, and then we'd be in progress. When you're ending your ride, you show this screen to take a photo, you had this review screen, and then you could rate your ride. One totally legitimate architecture we could have gone with for the client server, we need to have kind of two general states. One would be like in ride, and we could expand on in ride. We can say you're locked, you're unlocked, you're active, and the server would tell you all that. And the second one would be your post ride, and then we have all these separate states the server would kind of drive there. This is fine. This would have worked, but I think there's some limitations here. And that manifests itself with hidden complexity. Things like what's going to happen when you move from one state to the other? What happens if you flip from one state to the other in an unexpected way? What about the errors when you try and transition and it fails? And that's where I think the hidden complexity comes in. Also, when we talk back the desire path, are we building this out in a way where our features our product is not actually going to expand? Are we adding space for functionality where there really isn't any? And I don't think we're actually going to have a whole ton more in-ride states. So was this going to be as easy to reason about? We step back and we're just like, hey, maybe we can do it better. So instead, we realized that even though our golden path had a bunch of different screens, we actually could consolidate them quite a bit into just one enum. This was your reserve state, where you haven't actually started your ride, your in-ride active state, where you actually had it active, and then those intermediary states would be dictated by other data sources. And then you had your dropped off state, where your ride was effectively ended, but you could still navigate through different aspects. We were able to kind of look at this and know one endpoint, you pulled it, you got that value, we knew exactly what state the UI would be in as a result. This gave us a ton of confidence that this architecture worked. But we didn't just stop there. We made sure that all the stakeholders who were part of this architecture were bought in. This was not just the client and server engineers, but this was firmware engineers and hardware engineers, because the scooters needed to be an integral part of this. But we also got the product managers, the directors, and the designers involved as well. Sure, like maybe it was just an FYI, but we wanted to make sure that this fit their needs, where they saw things expanding. And we also gave them the ability to say, this is what we built, these are the things we can easily do within it, and we gave the ball back to them and said, Now it's your turn to decide where we want to go from here. This empowered them. So we've got our architecture, we've got our base, and now we actually have to start building. And I found this principle to be the most important when we actually start building something. Reimagine over reinventing. And that's kind of, I think of it like treating your code base like a bunch of Lego blocks. These two totally valid opinions always come up when I start a project. The first one being like, let's totally go it alone. And the second one being like, oh no, we totally need to be ready for the biggest launch imaginable. Because like when you have a really tight timeline, it's super understandable that you want to stay really small and lean. But if you're really worried about an enormous launch, you're going to do everything you can to leverage every bit of code all around your code base. But the reality is the optimal solution is almost always somewhere in between, which is about creatively reusing what you already have to empower you and to not interfere with other people. So when it comes to leveraging things you can already have, if you're already working in an Android code base, you already have tons of things already. You have things like a build system. You have things like network, authentication, databases. All this is built in already. But you also have things like a release process. You have testing. You have possibly even quality assurance engineers. And all of these things are a huge asset. So when we were asked, should this be a separate app, we made it really clear. We get an enormous amount already as part of our code base. And in fact, I had no idea how we could have launched this otherwise. So for all the people who have built this code, thank you. Secondly, if you do run into these problems, I found the biggest way that things slow you down is when you need another team to change something for you as part of their code base. And that's fine. That's something you will naturally run into. But when you hit a roadblock, I think it's so important to come back to your team and explain what's gone wrong and how you're going to get around it together. So here's like a good example. When we first had built out early versions of this scooters feature, we the PMs and designers asked if we could have an instantaneous notification in the app when the scooter was finally unlocked. It's an asynchronous thing. The scooter can take various times to respond to you, and this would require push notifications to come through our API service. And we already have RX kind of pretty far down our app, and hypothetically our code would react instantly if we were to upgrade this to a push-based infrastructure, but it was polling at the time. And when we talked to the infra team, they said, look, we really want to get push working, but we can't promise anything at the moment. So we went back to our team, and we explained this whole situation to them, and we said, let's see if we can do something in the meantime. Let's see if we can find some middle ground here. So what we found is that if we can just re-trigger that polling event at the right moments and change the polling rate depending on the UI circumstances, we could emulate, from the user perspective, if it was actually going to be an instantaneous push, but it wasn't. And the other thing is when you're building and you come across some bit of thing you can use, I always prefer encapsulation. So this is a true story. The PM came up to me one day and just said, hey RJ, can we put like a driver's license scanner in the app for when they get onboarded? And I thought to myself, like, that's really hard. I really don't want to unless I have to. And that may not solve a core user need, blah, blah, blah. And the PM just went like, well, we need one somehow. We could just enter it by a text, but I actually think it's easier because the driver team has already built one. And I was like, well, yeah, but it wouldn't work for us. But I dug around the code base, and I found this barcode view already made. That was really cool. So then we took a page from composition over inheritance, and we said, how can we wrap this view to work for us? So we took this barcode view, and we needed to get the mock on the right. So we wrapped it in our own overlay to make the UI look correct. And we wrote our own UI layer logic around it. And then we wrote our own business level logic around it, and we encapsulated that in our own component system. And we were able to use it in our version, in our feature, completely without touching any of the logic inside a barcode view. So the driver team wasn't impacted at all. And I came back to the PM, and I'm like, cool, I did it. And they were really excited. But I honestly think the most amount of time I spend in time I don't think is very effective, that's the most painful, is just doing very small iterations to the UI. It really eats up tons of development cycles, and we had none of that to spare in 2 months. So if I had any way to reuse it, I was going to find a way to. And this is where I have to say design systems are the best. because Lyft has its own design system, which we call the Lyft product language, and this was just supercharging us because we already had everything built. All the UI components we had comprehensively done. It looked great. It was designed for consistency, yada, yada, yada. And I could just kind of look at the mocks my designer sent me. I didn't need Zeppelin or any of those other tools. We could just look at a ping screenshot and know what were the font sizes, what were the padding, what was the grid size. And we could just roll from there because we only had a preset number of things. But we also got a lot of stuff for free that, as a developer, can end up eating tons of precious time at the last second. Things like getting the loading state looking perfect, getting disabled states looking perfect, getting internationalization and accessibility working correctly, making sure that you have consistency across the rest of your app. All these things can eat up tons of time, and we didn't have any of that. But honestly, I think my favorite part of the Lyft product language is that our design team worked really, really closely with the material design specifications, so the system itself really intuitively works with Android. And not all designers there know it, although I totally had a geek out when I got to hold that trophy. It was super fun. It's very heavy. But they would always send me iOS mocks, and they never really made me Android mocks. And I was never bothered because they worked fantastically on Android. Very few things actually needed to be changed when translating them. Actually, I think a lot of screenshots here are actually iOS, but I don't care. So this is how I used it day to day to really save me time. I would get designs from the designer, and I'd be like, hey, Josiah, it's a really cool button you put there, but like, is it part of the Lyft product language? And Josiah would just be like, I was kind of doing my own thing, riffing, it's a really cool button. And I'm like, I love it, Josiah, you have a great, it's a fun design. Just heads up, it's a new thing. It's probably gonna take me a week or two to like really make perfect, and we don't have a ton of time. So what would you say if I propose we just use the Lyft product language version, and it should take me like 10 minutes, and then we can talk about it later. And every single time, the designer was just like, cool, sounds good, don't even worry about it. And then we just move from there. And I just want to also say thanks to the Lyft design team, because I couldn't have done this without that work. But there were times when we couldn't actually reuse UI. We didn't have this to leverage. And my favorite story about this was when we had to write our own map bubbles. So we've been a map-first company for a long while, but we never really made a ton of use of the app, or map. We never really interacted with it a lot. And so when our golden path came in and all those mocks came in and there was a lot of interaction with the UI, it really was kind of worrying. It was a lot of work, and we knew this was going to have to be dealt with. But we couldn't really avoid it, and we also didn't have access to the deep layers of the Android Maps API than other apps working natively with it would. So when I think you have to write things from scratch, I have this prioritization in mind. I would much rather have readable, predictable, and code that like just works well enough versus anything that is complex but just like asymptotically perfect. So to write a map clustering algorithm, I did it in O of n squared time, which I have a master's in computer science, so part of me was super, super mad at myself. But I honestly think that this is really readable code. This does the job, and I have a to-do in there to upgrade it later. But because it's so easy to read and because it can be changed later, it's going to be future-proof so that we can change, or we're not going to have this be a source of bugs later on. And then most importantly, with the data we were expecting to see at the time, this wasn't going to be an issue. Finally, the last principle is listen, learn, and launch what matters. And this is all about what you're going to deal with as you approach launch day. There's kind of two main themes I see as you get close to launch that are kind of self-doubt related. The first one being, are we really sure this is the right product? And the second one being, are we actually ready for the launch itself? So when it comes to the first one, we had talked about our North Star and our golden path and what mattered to our users, but there are lots of unanswered questions. Basic stuff like, do they understand this reserve feature? It was not standard in scooter apps at the time. Do they understand some of our basics around locking and unlocking it? These were things that differed from our competitors. And then finally, the huge elephant in the room was, would anyone even understand that the Lyft app could get them a scooter? Or was this something that would make no sense to them? if you already have an established app and you're doing something very iterative, you have a lot of options at hand. You can iteratively roll out your feature. You can A/B test. You can understand how your users' preferences change as a reaction to this. You can understand user behavior, and you can guard against a lot of major technical issues. But if you're doing one big release, you don't have this. So what do you have? You have research. You have UX research, you have foundational research, you have usability testing, and we took advantage of that as much as we possibly could. We did ride-alongs with our team. We did usability studies. We as the engineers sat in on them too to make sure we understand the problems at hand. So I also want to say thanks to the Lyft research team. They really went above and beyond to make sure we launched something smooth. But then the second part of that, are we actually ready technically for launch day? Throughout this entire process, we were building everything in parallel. So while we were building the client, we were also building the server. We were also building the firmware, and we were also making sure the scooters were ready. But we needed to find a way to make sure every layer of these could be developed in isolation. So for the client, what we did was just put in a ton of mocks. They started out at the top layer, and as we developed more and more of our client, we buried them farther and farther until they were basically just mocking API calls, which was great. Just need to remember, once you remove those, it doesn't always work. And once we actually got the server up and running, we still didn't have the full stack. So I got really good at writing scripts. Scripts to emulate what the hardware and firmware would be doing, and then making sure both the client and server behaved correctly. So this was also the only time I've ever submitted Python code, which is sad because I had done Python for many years before entering the Android world, and it just looks so different now. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. But this was super useful. It really empowered us to get going. But then finally, once you really have all these pieces, you still don't know if they all work. And if you just assume you're going to do many layers of integration, plug them all in together, and they're going to work, I wish you the best of luck. We budgeted in an entire day of sitting all in a room together and saying we are not leaving here until we can get every bit of thing we can working in this flow. And it's kind of hilarious how many, because you do use different languages and different platforms, and null and empty state, and all of these things you didn't think of making a difference for your Python stack makes all the difference to your embedded systems C stack. And so we worked through all of these issues in one go, which was extremely tense, but when we actually got it working, it was just like the funnest moment ever. So you've built all the stack, you have it working, but are you really ready for your launch? And the fact is there will be a ton of unknowns when you actually hit the ground. And you need to have some sort of flexibility. But as Android developers, we know you put an APK out there, you have no flexibility. It is out there. So if you want any configurability or way to change it, you need to put that on the server. So things like a lot of feature flags to control and gate different parts of our experience. We added a lot of stuff around configuration flags to change the values of things to be able to say scale up and down. And then finally, and my favorite thing, is the Lyft Android stack has the ability to arbitrarily override any client-side string. And this meant when I screwed up what our market hours were, we were just able to override that one string and nobody noticed. So finally, it's launch day. You're out there. You have to be out there in the wild because you don't know what issues you're going to find. We actually found we had some server configuration issues on launch day. We fixed them real quick in the field, and this was super rewarding. But it was also so important just to understand how people were going to use this, how this is going to work into their lives. And launch after launch, we got a better understanding of what we were actually doing here. We got a better understanding of who our users were, why they were using our product, and that got us back to refining our North Star vision, which then helped us better prioritize what we needed to build. And I'm super excited because this architecture ended up being used to allow you today to get city bikes in the Lyft app. So this is a screenshot from last night. It totally works. I used it. It's very fun. Yes. So honestly, my biggest takeaways here, coming from someone who has done the wrong thing most of the time before figuring these out, I really want to say that the best way I've found to build things fast and safe and launch something that actually matters to your users is to stay simple and lean, to use reimagining over reinventing, and to listen, learn, and launch what matters. Thanks.